Story 1, The Stranger at the Bar. This happened a few winters ago. I had just finalized my divorce about 6 months earlier, and, to put it lightly, I needed a reset. Christina, my girlfriend at the time, suggested we take a trip somewhere quiet, somewhere far away from the chaos I'd been dealing with. After some searching, we found a rental on a lake in upstate New York. I booked it for a week without much thought. The place was exactly what I needed, a modern yet cozy house, right on the lake, surrounded by woods. There were only a handful of other properties scattered along the shoreline, and most of them were empty. It wasn't peak season for lakefront living, which worked out perfectly. I welcomed the seclusion. I needed peace, and this place promised just that. The host wasn't going to be there, but he sent us detailed instructions about where to find the keys and other info about the house, typical Airbnb stuff. When we arrived, there was a small package waiting for us on the front steps. No return address, just a little handwritten note that said, "Enjoy your stay. Make sure to stay warm." It was a cute gesture, but inside the package was something strange, an old box of matches. We laughed it off, thinking it was a quirky gift. Christina joked about how upstate people were always a bit odd, and we moved on. The next 2 days were everything we wanted: long hikes through the snow, hot drinks by the fireplace, total peace and quiet. But I should mention that the snow had been falling steadily since we arrived. Not quite a blizzard, but enough to make everything look untouched. The scenery was perfect. It was on the third night that things took an unexpected turn. I woke up to a faint sound, barely audible over the wind and the sound of falling snow. At first, I thought it was just the storm getting stronger. The snow was coming down in thick sheets, and the wind was starting to pick up. But then, the sound grew clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was something mechanical. Something man-made. I slid out of bed carefully, making sure not to wake Christina, and crept across the room. I looked out the window, and that's when I saw it. A snowmobile. It was moving slowly across the ice. At first, I thought nothing of it. People drive snowmobiles on frozen lakes all the time. But it was so late, and the visibility wasn't great with the snowstorm. I could still see the shape of the snowmobile, but something about the way it moved caught my attention. It wasn't speeding. It was moving cautiously, like the driver wasn't sure if the ice was safe. Then, without warning, it came to a complete stop. The driver got off and started waving their arms around, as if trying to signal for help. They were shouting, but the wind made it impossible to hear. My first instinct was to think they had gotten stuck in the storm, so I decided to help. I woke up Christina and told her what was going on. Then, I quickly dressed and went downstairs. I stepped out onto the deck, the cold biting at my skin. The snow was falling harder now, and I could feel the chill in the air. As I made my way toward the lake, I could see the snowmobile more clearly. The person was a woman. She was waving her arms frantically, shouting about her little boy being lost in the snowstorm. It was bizarre. She was out there, alone, looking for a child in the middle of a blizzard, but the more I watched, the more I realized something didn't add up. First off, it didn't make sense for a kid to be out there in that weather. If a child had been lost, they wouldn't last long in those conditions. And then there was the snowmobile itself. How could a mother not notice her own kid falling off a snowmobile? It didn't add up. But in my panic, I didn't stop to think about it too much. I just wanted to help. I moved closer, calling out to her. But then, just as I was about to approach, she said something that made me freeze. "Do you still have the matches?" she asked. And then I saw her smile. At first, I was confused. What was she talking about? Matches? But then it hit me, the matches. The ones we had found in the package on the first day. The note had said, "Make sure to stay warm." And then I remembered, that was no ordinary welcome gift. She had left that package. Not the host. My heart dropped. Something wasn't right. Before I could react, she pulled a gun from her coat and pointed it at me. She demanded my wallet and phone. I didn't hesitate. I handed them over. I didn't have a choice. In less than 30 seconds, the woman was back on the snowmobile, speeding away into the blizzard. I stood there, frozen, watching her disappear into the snowstorm, unable to move. I ran back to the house, shouting for Christina to call the police. I locked the doors behind me and paced around, still shaking from the adrenaline. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that snowmobile come back. The police arrived about an hour later. By then, the snow had covered any tracks the woman might have left behind. Christina was in a state of shock, but I was mostly angry. I had come there for peace, not for this. The officers searched the area, but they didn't find anything unusual. They found an old boat ramp on the far side of the lake, which seemed like a plausible way she had gotten onto the ice, but that was it. There were no signs of the woman or the snowmobile. The whole thing seemed unreal. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't the end of it. That woman had been watching us. She knew about the matches. She had planned this, and we had walked right into her trap. We didn't feel safe at that house anymore, and after that night, we left early. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something we were missing, something we had never fully understood. It was like a piece of the puzzle was always just out of reach. And even now, when I think back on it, I wonder, what was the point of it all? Why were we targeted? It's a mystery that I'll never fully understand. Story 2, Sebi, the man who planned everything. The night was cold and eerie as Sebi sat quietly at the bar, his eyes fixed on the glass of whiskey in front of him. He wasn't one to talk much, not a man of many words. Yet, those around him couldn't help but notice the aura of calmness that seemed to surround him, even in the most chaotic situations. He was the kind of man who didn't flinch in the face of danger. Everything, for him, was about control. The world was simply a puzzle, one that he carefully pieced together in his mind. Tonight, though, he felt an unfamiliar sense of unease. As he took a sip of his drink, his mind wandered back to the days that led him here. Sebi had always been methodical, calculating every step, every move. Nothing was left to chance. His plans were flawless, always in motion, moving him forward with a sense of purpose. But now, something had gone wrong. There was a man, an odd man, who'd caught his attention earlier that night. He had appeared out of nowhere, sitting at the far end of the bar, watching Sebi as if he knew him. The stranger's eyes were unsettling, too knowing, like he had seen deep into Sebi's soul. Sebi brushed it off at first, assuming the man was just a drunk looking for trouble. But that feeling, that nagging sensation in the back of his mind, it wouldn't leave him alone. The man's gaze was too focused, his presence too deliberate. It felt as though he knew things, secrets that Sebi had never shared with anyone. In an instant, Sebi felt a rush of adrenaline. This stranger wasn't just any man. He had to be connected to something, someone, from Sebi's past. Maybe even someone he had tried to forget. Sebi stood up from his seat, his movements deliberate and calculated. He had already made his decision. There was only one way to deal with threats like this: control. He made his way towards the man, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up as he drew closer. The man didn't flinch when Sebi sat beside him. Instead, he smiled, a smile that sent chills down Sebi's spine. "Been a long time, Sebi," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. Sebi froze. He had been expecting a confrontation, but not this. How did he know his name? The stranger's eyes locked onto Sebi's with a chilling intensity. You've planned everything. Haven't you? He whispered, the words hanging in the air like a threat. Sebi's heart raced, his mind spinning as he tried to make sense of the situation. He had always been the one in control, but now, this man had thrown him off balance. I don't know you, Sebi replied, his voice tight with tension. The stranger's grin widened. You will. In time. In that moment, Sebi realized that the man was not just some random person. He was a reminder, of mistakes from the past, of things Sebi had tried to bury. And now, those buried secrets were coming back to haunt him. As the man stood to leave, Sebi's mind raced. He had to make sure no one knew about this encounter. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something far worse was coming for him, and no matter how much Sebi had planned, he couldn't control what was about to unfold. Story 3, Brandon, the boy who smiled with a knife. It was a quiet town, one where nothing much ever happened. People lived their lives with a sense of comfort, their routines never interrupted. But there was one boy, one unsettling figure who had begun to make the residents uneasy. Brandon was just 14, but his eyes were older, wiser than his years. There was something about him, something that made you look twice. He had an unnerving smile, one that never seemed to fade, even in the most serious situations. But it wasn't the smile itself that made people shiver. It was what he held in his hand. A knife. Brandon always carried it. At first, people didn't think much of it. Perhaps it was a phase, or maybe it was just a boy being rebellious. But as time passed, they noticed something strange about the way he wielded the knife. He was never aggressive, never threatening with it. Instead, he kept it with him like a silent companion, a part of his identity. But one day, everything changed. It started with a series of strange disappearances in the town. Pets went missing, and then, one by one, children began to vanish. No one knew where they had gone, or why. Panic spread like wildfire, but the police couldn't find any clues. The only thing people could talk about was the boy, Brandon. He was always nearby when these things happened. It was as if he knew things, as if he was part of something darker. Then, one evening, a young girl named Emily, who had always been kind to Brandon, disappeared. The entire town searched for her, desperate to find her before it was too late. But it wasn't until they found a trail of blood leading to the edge of the woods that they began to realize how horrifying the truth was. Brandon was waiting there, standing in the moonlight, his ever-present smile still stretched across his face. In his hand, the knife glistened, and there was no mistaking the terror in his eyes. I told you they'd never believe you, he whispered, his voice carrying through the silence. I tried to warn them. But now, it's too late. Brandon's eyes narrowed, and with a quick motion, he threw the knife. The blade embedded deep in the tree next to Emily, who had been hiding in the shadows, her face pale and trembling. You see, Brandon continued, his voice chillingly calm, the knife isn't for me. It's for them. It always has been. Brandon's smile never wavered, even as the town's screams echoed through the night. What they didn't understand was that Brandon was not just a boy. He was a predator, a force of nature in the form of a child who had learned long ago that fear was the most powerful weapon of all. The town would never be the same again, haunted by the memory of the boy who smiled with a knife.